Hello and welcome to Wednesday Warfare, where I review NXT and AEW Dynamite back-to-back and try and figure out which show won for the week. And as always, like what you like, don't be a dick. Let's begin. So there's a bit of news surrounding NXT this week. You might have heard there was a COVID outbreak happening in the CWC, the Performance Center, what have you, which affected a couple of matches. Turns out Leon Ruff versus Isaiah Swerve Scott and Thatcher and Ciampa versus Imperium did not happen. There was a storyline maneuvering around one of those things, but then there was a complete no-sell of the other one. So hope everyone is okay, but that is some context going into this week's show. It begins with Finn Balor, the champion, celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and Finn is still the champion. Says he's beaten everybody who's come before him except for Karrion Kross, and he says, Karrion, at TakeOver, your time is up. Karrion Kross and Scarlett then show up, and Karrion says the world needs to know who the real champion is, and Finn says you may walk like a champion and talk like a champion, but Finn is the champion and Karrion is not in his league. Scarlett then has the mic and says she has seen it in the tarot cards, a vision of two champions draped in gold and the world in awe. And almost by coincidence, the tag team champions, LORCAN and BURCH, show up and they sing the praises of Pete Dunne, how he still deserves a shot against Finn Balor. And then Scarlett, using her womanly charms to convince LORCAN and BURCH to put up the tag titles in a match tonight against Karrion Kross and Finn Balor. And so that match is on for the main event, and my mind immediately went to just, boy, are we really going to get a title consolidation between these two rivals going into this? I mean, we'll see what ultimately happens, but that was my initial kind of like my thought / fear. First match sees Austin Theory versus Dexter Lumis in a grudge match, but Gargano and LeRae are not in Theory's corner tonight, and Indy Hartwell's nowhere to be seen either. But we see Johnny and Candice on the iPad talking to Austin, giving him a real big pep talk before he goes out for his match. I think Theory holds his own pretty well in this thing here. The spot at the end when Lumis puts his hand out and Theory's like, no, but you said all those things. Then he takes the hand, he hugs Lumis going, I knew I could trust you. And then Lumis catches him in a trap trying to go for silence. Austin gets out of it and says, I knew I couldn't trust you. I thought, the pivot by Theory there was pretty entertaining. Goes to ATL, but Lumis counters out of it and gets him into silence to win. That awful canned Dexter Lumis chant then fills the CWC. I thought it was a pretty good showing by both guys. Well, here's a rewrite brought on by COVID. We see Tommaso Ciampa backstage. He says that Timothy Thatcher not in the building tonight, but he suspects Imperium is responsible for that, so he's plotting a plot of his own. And then we see Adam Cole in the ring calling out Kyle O'Reilly for what happened when he cost Cole the NXT title match last week. So he signed his own death warrant, and he wants him to come out to the ring, but then William Regal shows up and says, Kyle is not in the building tonight. He's been banned. He actually aggravated an injury in fighting with you last week. Then we see Kyle O'Reilly himself on the big screen doing a car promo, interrupting Regal. So he says he will not rest until he gets back at Adam for trying to end his career. He says, I know where you live. I know where you hang out, where you buy video games. I'm going to find you. And then when his promo is done, Cole basically says, not unless I find him first. And we will see how that develops as the night goes on. Backstage, the new NXT Women's Tag Champs, Ember Moon and Shotzi Blackheart, are being interviewed about winning the belts last week, and suddenly the Robert Stone brand interrupt, and they challenge the two of them to a title match next week. The champions accept, so we got that. We then see Jordan Devlin, the original Cruiserweight champion, pulling up to the building. And up next, Legado del Fantasma take on Breezango as a result of what happened last week. It's a good match, blind tag proving to be Tyler Breeze's downfall as Wild and Mendoza get the win. And then afterward, you see Santos grabbing one of the headset mics on the announce table saying, where's Jordan Devlin? Where's this champion I've heard so much about? Devlin himself shows up with his own version of the Cruiserweight Championship, and he says, the real champion is here, and you may be the king of the Cruiserweights, but the ace is back. And so then Santos challenges him to a unification match at TakeOver Stand and Deliver. Devlin responds with a big ol' headbutt to the face and a big slam as well, and then he runs out to escape the goons from getting him. So turns out we're gonna get the unification match like I figured was gonna happen, and should be a good one. And I'm not familiar with what Devlin, where he was in the face heel alignment before the pandemic. I could have swore he was a heel. So we've got this interesting dynamic where it feels like Devlin is a face here just by default against Santos. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I don't know. I think from what I remember of Jordan before pre-pandemic, I remember liking his heel work. So we'll see if they keep it up. At this point, I might as well continue on explaining all what happens with the Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly saga on this episode, because Adam, I should say, goes to leave. He's going to find Kyle O'Reilly. And then a few segments later on the show, we see outside the building, there's some kind of incident with police where both men are in handcuffs and Kyle is in one of the squad cars and they're screaming at each other, and Adam claims to Regal that Kyle tried to run him over with his car. And so then after the break, we see Regal saying, if the police let them go, if they have no charges, I need Cole and O'Reilly to come to NXT next week where I can provide some kind of resolution to this. I think this was a great thread throughout the show. The thing's getting real, what it seems like here. It just felt like a real level of intensity we haven't seen before from these guys. Even O'Reilly saying in his promo on the big screen, it's like he was kind of like almost breaking down, almost going crazy over the idea that his supposed best friend tried to end his career not too long ago. And so, yeah, I think, this has been brewing for a long time, and I'm really excited to see where this is going to go. We get a little hype package for ZOEY, another Japanese women's star coming to NXT, and then we've got Zoey Stark versus Dakota Kai, and this match gets some time. I was impressed by this. I think Zoey looked like $1 million, looked really good. I think Kai made her look very good in this match. A great callback to the famous HBK Shelton Benjamin spot in this one, where Zoey goes for the springboard and Dakota intercepts her out of the sky with the sweet chin music, the super kick. That was great stuff, and ultimately Dakota wins with the Dakota kick, so valiant effort by the newcomer Zoey, but she does not come up. She comes up short on this one. Then after the match, we see Io Shirai showing up with a contract. She walks right past Dakota and hands it over to Raquel, saying, making it clear she wants to defend the title against Raquel Gonzalez. And so that's going to be happening. We've got some kind of side-eye looking thing from Dakota. Wonder where that's going to go. But yeah, I think the match itself with Zoey and Dakota was great. And then the follow-up with Io Shirai showing up, that just kind of was a good way to wrap it up. GYV cutting a promo on MSK from what happened last week, and Zach Gibson showing off the heavily taped hand as a result of what happened. He says that MSK is not going to like where this goes from here after some more strong words are shared. Up next, Tommaso Ciampa takes on Marcel Bartel of Imperium. Ciampa attacking with a chair beforehand, and also noticeable by his absence is Alexander Wolf. And Wade Barrett's got a theory for where both he and T-Thatch are. They're going fishing together. In the end, Ciampa wins this hard-hitting match with the Willow's Bell. Then afterward, you've got the return of Walter. Walter, the NXT UK champion and the leader of Imperium, back on NXT US for the first time in what feels like forever, since well before the pandemic. And he's there, and I was kind of put off by the way the CWC, automated crowd was programmed to respond. Obviously, you can't, it's like the live audience there, you can only hear so much of them. But I mean, even when Walter was there with crowds, and even as a heel, and that's never been questioned, he's always been a heel since he's been coming to WWE, he's always been cheered overall by fans. And so when they pipe in all the boos, it just felt so like, oh, boo, here's Walter. It's like it was such a standard sound effect. I think that really hurt the impact of the return of Walter, where he and the rest of Imperium beat down Ciampa. I think, there's two things that made Walter's return tonight feel really flat. One was the way it was designed by the powers that be who control the soundboard and the Thunderdome technology or whatever, and also the lack of Thatcher being there because of the COVID scare. And I'm not going to blame the COVID half of it for this, because obviously they have a hard time controlling that. But I think when you can control your environment, I think having some kind of like return pop kind of built in for Walter would have made it feel a lot better than it did. But yeah, the boo sound effect really took me out of it. Well, I could have sworn LA Knight's in-ring debut this week was supposed to be against Bronson Reed. The last couple of weeks certainly suggested that, but we didn't get that. Instead, Knight takes on Austin Gray. A couple of minutes in, we see Reed making his way out to the stage with LA Knight's big, fancy custom leather coat, and he does his best Chris Farley impression. Richard, what's happening? Rip. So yeah, the jacket's totally destroyed, but Knight is able to recover from that distraction and hits Gray with his finisher to win the match. So, short and sweet kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, I could have sworn they made this match. It makes sense that they're prolonging the Bronson Reed thing for some other thing, maybe Stand and Deliver or some episode of NXT or something like that beforehand. But yeah, I thought I'm going crazy. I could have sworn that match was already made. We see Raquel Gonzalez looking at her contract backstage, and Dakota Kai shows up and says she's made a match next week for the two of them versus Io and Zoey Stark. And she says talks about how she needs this matchup because their last 2 tag team matches ended in losses, so this could be their kind of way to bounce back, so to speak. We also get a ZOEY promo where she says resistance will not be tolerated. And then we go to our main event for the NXT tag titles as LORCAN and BURCH defend against Karrion, Kross, and Finn Balor. At some point in the match, BURCH appears to get injured. He hurts his arm or something, so he's checked on by the trainers for a lot of this thing. He's just not really a factor in the second half of this matchup. The big twist or big thing that happens here in this match is that Finn on the outside with a running drop kick to LORCAN, who falls right into Scarlett, and she gets, just totally blown away by that impact. So she's knocked out. Finn goes to check on her, and you can see that, from the camera angle, she's smiling, but she's hiding it from Finn. And Karrion goes nuts and beats up his own tag team partner, throws him back in the ring, and so then he eats the unbridled rage for LORCAN and BURCH to retain, which honestly kind of surprised me. I thought this was going to be the classic setup of these 2 rivals winning the tag belts on the first go around and the established team losing, which is a trope we've seen so often before. And I feel especially with the NXT tag titles as of late, for the last 6 or so months, I feel, or maybe even 7, I think that the tag belts have been kind of a non-factor in the show itself. I think it's almost been used to move other people's plots along and not an actual tag team. But luckily that didn't happen, so the champs retain here. We see Kross beating the bejesus out of LORCAN afterward, and then more beatdown on Finn afterward with the Kross jacket and the big forearm to the back. And then Scarlett kneels down over Finn's prone body and repeats the phrase, "Everything happens for a reason. You can't escape your fate," as we fade to black. I did enjoy this little twist. The match itself, it was what it was, but the twist with, Scarlett getting knocked over and then Finn being, held responsible for it, Karrion looking like a big badass here, just looking like a killer against Finn at the end of the show, I think was great for him. And I'm relieved that we didn't get the, rivals as tag champions trope this time. Dynamite opens up with Cody Rhodes versus PENTA El Zero M. Of course, this was brought about from last week when PENTA had his incendiary comments toward Cody and his unborn daughter. They seem to be really leaning into having Alex Abrahantes as his mouthpiece, PENTA's mouthpiece, that is, as we saw in the pre-match promo they had. I'm starting to dig that vibe. And this match is great. Some really good back and forth here. I think these two have really flexible in-ring styles that allow them to both work kind of a wrestling, traditional wrestling, and also do some more high flying. Big Hurricane Rana by Cody at one point, followed up with a dive a few minutes later. PENTA kicks out of Crossroads. Cody hits the vertebreaker at one point, which was rad, but I wish it were the finish. In the end, Cody's been having his arm worked all match. PENTA does the big snapback, arm attack thing, and Cody sells it for a couple seconds, but has the wherewithal to then roll up PENTA and beat him 1, 2, 3, which I thought, except for, the rest of the match, I thought was great, but that finish, kind of bullshit in my opinion. So then afterward, PENTA beats up Cody and attacks the arm some more. He's chased out by all of the Nightmare family except for one person, and as we see PENTA trying on different leprechaun hats from the audience members in the front row, the other wrestlers, and posing with them, he finally makes his way to the stage, and there's QT Marshall from the Nightmare family kind of sauntering his way out very much late to try to make a save, but I'm not mad at him. What was his rush? The Nightmare family already had PENTA outnumbered 5-1. The Young Bucks interviewed backstage, and they're asked about the Death Triangle and the upcoming tag title match. Matt Jackson saying they're still the best damn tag team on earth. We see Don Callis come in, and he hands the Bucks the no leg slapping t-shirt, and basically Callis's role in this scene is to try and, I guess, motivate or belittle / motivate the Young Bucks in this one, because he says, you guys aren't the same killers I saw in Japan. Kenny Omega can't even recognize you anymore because he's a god among men in wrestling, and you're still down here, you're in the basement somewhere, not the same team, your careers are dead, he says to the tag team champions. But he tells them to look in the mirror and see if they see the same warriors that they were back in Japan. And we see some kind of introspective look from the Bucks, and we'll see more of them later. We go from that to Jade Cargill's singles debut in AEW, going against Danny Jordan. Pretty open and shut case. She squashes Jordan in about a minute or less, and then afterward talks trash to Red Velvet, who's sitting in the front row ringside. Jade looks strong here in what the limited sample size of what we see of her, and hopefully there'll be a rematch one-on-one with her and Red Velvet to build off that mixed tag match they had a couple weeks ago, and we'll see where that goes. Up next, MJF comes out with his new heel supergroup, FTR. FTR, Tully Blanchard, Wardlow, and Shawn Spears. Tully's on the microphone first, saying in 1984 he was working with the best group of guys in wrestling, and he wants to ride out the rest of his career with the best group of guys in wrestling. He says, when you've reached this level, you're at the pinnacle, and there's nowhere else to go. MJF on the microphone next, and he kind of basically reiterates what Tully said, and officially naming this group the Pinnacle, and he talks about how he had to pretend to like Chris Jericho and his, quote, ha-ha comedy bullshit for 6 months, which I had a feeling I was kind of hopeful that would play into that. Like I said in my Revolution review when they were promoting the War Summit from last week, you know, it's like all these different gimmicks and names Jericho always tacked on, and to hear MJF call him out on that, I thought was a great return to character for him and just being, you know, this sleazy guy. He says he had everybody fooled that he was going to try and take over the Inner Circle, but from day one, his goal was to always destroy the group from within and form his own stronger coalition, and he puts over all the different team members one by one, and then of course he brings up himself and how good he is at the age of 24 and how it sticks in people's craw that he is so good at such a young age, and basically he's telling Chris Jericho that he is better than him and he knows it, and that's where it wraps up. I think this is a great opening promo from the Pinnacle. I love the name Pinnacle, by the way. That's a great name for a group like this, kind of Horseman-esque kind of this group. And I think, you know, Tully and MJF together in the same team being the two main mouthpieces for the group, that's amazing. Like two great talkers, Tully being kind of the J.J. Dillon, the elder statesman of the group. I think that's going to be, I'm really looking forward to the chemistry with the Pinnacle, more so than I was with the Inner Circle. That group took me a long time to warm up to when it came to, like, do these guys fit together? I think for the most part, the Pinnacle, I think, has that better kind of ingrained chemistry. And actually, one little note here I wanted to point out that I almost forgot about was during their entrance, Excalibur even says, you know, months ago, we saw MJF and gambling with Shawn Spears and Tully. Could that have been the genesis of this group in this union? Man, that is some deep storytelling, some deep seed planting, if that was the case. Big 10-man tag match up next. Dinosaurs and Bears working together. You have the Jurassic Express and Bear Country against Matt Hardy, Private Party, and the Butcher and the Blade. Great pre-match promo, the pre-tape by Matt Hardy here, saying he wants to build an empire, the Matt Hardy empire. At one point early on, Bear Country hurl Marco Stunt onto all the opponents outside. Damn near lands on his head on the way out, but it was a very close call, but it looked effective nonetheless. In the end, the baby faces, the Jurassic Express and Bear Country can't get along, and Marco Stunt takes the initiative, tags himself in, and that's his undoing because he's ultimately hit with gin and juice and then a twist of fate by an opportunistic Matt Hardy who like really wanted the glory, so he gets tagged in after he's already done for by Private Party. So Matt and his group win the match. I thought the match was interesting. I like the fact they had two different stories going on at once here, not just the lack of communication, lack of chemistry with the good guy teams, but also Matt Hardy further cementing his place and his character and how, you know, he wants all the glory and everything. So yeah, in that way I thought it was good, and a lot of interesting directions that both of those stories can go. We see Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston having a chat here. This promo feels like 100% off the cuff. Maybe they're given one or two bullet points and said, here, go for 60 or 90 seconds and make the most of it. And they did. It felt very natural, felt very unscripted, unfiltered, and it was kind of refreshing to see, talking about how they hate the Good Brothers, and Moxley says, I don't just hate you because I wasted money on Talking Shop-A-Mania. Kingston wraps things up. He's quoting 50 Cent and Tupac, saying, you know, cowards die 1,000 deaths, but we soldiers, we die just but once. So yeah, pretty strong promo here, and it was just, yeah, it was kind of refreshing to see, almost like conversational at some point, as they're kind of like, you know, just talking about whatever's going on. Yeah, I was entertained by this promo. And speaking of promos, it's finally time for Christian Cage to speak. We hear him being interviewed backstage, talks about how he's the workhorse in professional wrestling and how he makes wrestling better and that he helps his opponents level up, which is a pretty interesting kind of true to life statement based on everything we've heard about Christian for the last several years as a worker. So I think it's kind of cool they're bringing that into his character overall. He says he is here in AEW to cement his legacy. He wants a shot at Kenny Omega, but he does acknowledge he has to get some wins first. So at least there's that. They're not just going to jump the gun and have Christian challenge right away. it seems. But yeah, he says he's going to earn some wins, but one day he and Omega will face off in the ring, and he wants to cement his legacy and outwork everyone, which is his slogan. Pretty solid first first statement by Christian since being signed and being announced at Revolution. And yeah, I think it pretty much laid his whole MO, but it laid it pretty bare, I think. Moxley and Kingston versus the Good Brothers up next. Before the match begins, though, Moxley's taken out with a very gentle magic killer on the floor, so it's 2-on-1 for a while. John ultimately gets back into the ring, and he's selling his arm, but kind of like he's pushing through it, which means he's not really selling his arm. It's like his entire comeback is like all injured arm-based offense, but he's like gutting it out and everything, including the big dives. Moxley ends up hitting a small package out of nowhere to win the match, but then right afterward, the Good Brothers beat up Moxley and Kingston. Kenny Omega shows up doing a bit of a strut, feeling very full of himself. He's got a chair and he wants to do something, but Kingston makes the save, and then they Pillmanize Kingston's leg. They're about to do it with Moxley's neck, but then the Young Bucks run in and stop it and try and defuse the situation. Kenny and the Good Brothers want to do the hand thing, but the Bucks think about it and they want none of it. They go to leave, and Omega's starting to get really incensed at them, and he's like taking his shirt off. He's going crazy over this, lack of loyalty to the group and whatever. And then while that's going on, Moxley recovers. He chases the baddies out with the chair, and we see this kind of moment of kind of understanding between the Bucks and Moxley there, and that's where that segment ends. I thought the match was okay. I'm just wondering, where is this thing with the Bucks and Omega gonna go? I feel that like the bit they had, I think last summer or last fall, when they kind of flirted with the idea of being heels and that totally didn't work, like that really kind of knocked the Bucks off their whole trajectory. It feels like it felt very inorganic. It felt very weird, and then it had a really clunky if you could call it one. And so I think that they're finally getting their mojo back in terms of like where they are creatively as characters. This weird dynamic where they're kind of torn between loyalty to Kenny Omega, but also not approving of what he and the Good Brothers are doing. And I think this is kind of bringing that to the forefront. So you still have my attention with this angle, Young Bucks. So hopefully we can see it through. Tony Schiavone on stage to interview Sting and Darby Allin yet again. But hey, Sting doesn't even talk this week. I'm pretty sure he doesn't get one word in. So easy PO for the Stinger this week. Darby Allin says he wants to be a fighting TNT champion now that the biz with Team Taz is over with. And so invoking the name of the greatest TNT champion of all time, he issues an open challenge to the Dark Order. Lance Archer then interrupts and then asks what everyone is thinking: how many times are you going to interview Sting, Schiavone? He calls Darby an indie-rific joke that he'll put him in a coffin, and then Jake Roberts puts Archer over a bit and then kind of ushers Archer away, warning Sting and warning Darby that something bad's going to happen. Then Team Taz shows up, and Brian Cage has some words for Sting where he says, I respect you after the street fight, and despite what Ricky Starks says, you are still an icon. And the rest of Team Taz is losing their shit over these unexpected words from Brian Cage, but Cage kind of brushes them off and goes back up the tunnel. The face turn for Cage does feel like it comes out of left field after everything that's been going on with Team Taz. But like I said last week, AEW feels a bit heel heavy right now, and they need some baby faces to kind of counteract all of these heel conglomerations they've got going on right now. So Brian Cage kind of breaking away from Team Taz, however long it's going to take, seems to be a step in that right direction. I think Cage is a better heel than a babyface, but we'll see how this plays out. We do find out later on that John Silver is accepting the open challenge with Darby Allin, and speaking of the TNT Championship, we get a recap package of Scorpio Sky's heel turn from last week, where he says, he's failed at being the nice guy, he's tired of being everyone's stepping stone, and now he's going to get what he deserves, and if he has to hurt people on his way to it, so be it. And our next match sees REY FENIX versus Angelico. This has got some good lucha things in this matchup here, as to be expected from both guys. I loved Phoenix's kind of roll into a cutter, and Angelico's sell job from that too was exquisite. In the end, a kind of a cool counter out of what seemed to be some kind of fireman's carry from Angelico into a crucifix bomb, and he hits a sit-out pile driver to win his match. So yeah, pretty good competitive, fast-paced match. Miro's interviewed backstage, and he's a bad guy because the lighting is very red here, and he talks about how he's not interested in Chuck Taylor and Orange Cassidy's challenge for a rematch, even though Chuck did sweeten the pot with that lifetime butlership opportunity that he mentioned. As then Kip walks in, Kip Sabian, saying he wants the match because he still needs to get back at Chuck Taylor for getting knocked into Penelope Ford at Revolution by Miro, and Miro kind of brushes it off, saying, how can you care about your wife more than winning the match? And he says, when I'm in the ring, it doesn't matter who's in my way or what's going on, my goal is to fulfill my destiny me of becoming champion. But he says, we're still buds though, afterward. And then Kip, after Miro walks off, saying, of course we accept the match with Chuck and Orange. So yeah, more cracks showing in the armor between these two friends, showing more of like Miro's shrewd personality and how he will do whatever it takes to win. You know, friends be damned. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out in the rematch. And then it's time for the main event, the lights out, anything goes, falls count anywhere match between Thunder Rosa and Britt Baker. Big rivalry coming to a head here. The first women's main event in AEW history, which I think is pretty cool. It's a big enough test as it is, but then to throw in this whole thing of, hey, it's unsanctioned, you know, anything goes kind of gimmick match, it really ramps things up. But these two absolutely deliver, let me tell you. I mean, they're just going, beating the hell out of each other the entire time. Rebel is helping out as well. Thunder's trying to hold her own. Thunder is bleeding after her head is stomped in on some steps. And then later, there's a superplex on a big pile of chairs, and Thunder drop kicks a ladder into Britt's face, and she's just leaking. My God, the amount of blood that Britt Baker spilled on this night was like, it was biblical. It was so gross. Thunder, it's a Death Valley driver from the ropes onto a ladder bridge. That is somehow not the finish. There's an iconic shot of Britt looking at the camera and crawling, like you're looking right at it with her face just absolutely coated in blood as she makes her way to grab the glove for the lockjaw. Britt also brings out the thumbtacks, which is nuts, and Rebel gets knocked off the apron through a table by Thunder. Powerbomb by Britt into the thumbtacks, still not the finish. She gets a lockjaw like in there, but Thunder's able to counter it rolling back. Britt rolls back first, back onto the tacks. Then finally they make their way to the apron, fire Thunder driver onto Britt off the apron through a table. Very high looking on the neck, by the way. That looked pretty snug. But then Thunder pinning Britt to win. Damn, what a main event. What a match. Easily the match of the night between both shows by far. And I would argue that it's a contender for, you know, match of the week, match of the month, even a contender for match of the year so far. Yes, I'm willing to go that far and say it, because these two absolutely delivered. I think it's a great end to the feud, and these two just, yeah, they left it all out on the line in this matchup here. And I think it also speaks to Britt's evolution as a performer, because a year or two ago when she started out in AEW, she was not that great. Her character wasn't really well defined, her stuff in the ring wasn't good either, and in the span of about a year and a half, I think she's grown so much as a character and as a performer, and Thunder Rosa too, for that matter. I think these two, yeah, absolutely delivered. What a fire match this was. I recommend it to anyone watching, because it is just, it's wildly entertaining. It's hard to watch sometimes, but it's just ultimately just so rewarding to watch. Time now for me to decide which show won for the week, and in case you couldn't see it coming based on my glowing review of the main event, I gotta go with AEW this week. I mean, NXT was a good show this week. I enjoyed the match with Zoe Stark and Dakota Kai. That was probably my pick for the match of the night on that show, just in terms of overall quality. I think that the stuff they're doing with the build with the two biggest angles right now, Cole and O'Reilly, Balor and Kross, is being well done. But son of a bitch, they did not have AEW's main event, I will tell you right now. And I also enjoyed Pinnacle's opening promo as well, and I think that the stuff they're doing with Omega and the Young Bucks currently has my attention. But yeah, it's strictly on the weight of that amazing main event. I gotta give it to AEW. But what did you think of NXT and AEW this week? Let me know in the comments section below. And finally, one last reminder that because I'll be out of town for the next week and a half, I will not be able to do the SmackDown review for the next 2 weeks. I will not be doing the Fastlane predictions or review, sadly, which is, it's too bad, because there's some matches on that card I'm really looking forward to and very curious about, but I won't be able to see it this weekend. No Raw review either. So yeah, and also next Wednesday's video, next Thursday's video, probably only gonna have time to watch one show or the other, and it's probably gonna be AEW, but we'll have to see what happens with that one. So keep that in mind. But yes, it's still, we're kind of we're heading toward a bit of a channel break right now. A very brief channel break, and it's not gonna be totally without content. But as far as like the big Wednesday long forms, taking a small break from that after next week. But you'll find out more about all that in the weeks to come. And until then, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.